In the heart of a crumbling town, where the wind howled through broken windows and the streets smelled of despair, lived a young woman named Leila. Her world had once been bright, filled with the laughter of her mother, Clara, who raised her alone after her father vanished into the night. But now, Clara lay frail in a hospital bed, her body ravaged by a relentless illness that drained their savings like water through a sieve. The doctors were clear: without a costly treatment, Clara wouldn't survive the month. Leila, barely 20, worked tirelessly at a diner, but her wages were a cruel joke against the towering medical bills. Desperation clung to her like a shadow, whispering choices she never thought she'd consider. One evening, as the neon sign flickered outside the diner, a stranger in a sleek black suit approached her. His eyes were cold, his smile sharper than a blade. He offered her a deal: one night of companionship for $250, enough to cover a fraction of her mother's treatment. The money wasn't enough to save Clara, but it was a start, a lifeline in a sea of hopelessness. Leila's hands trembled as she nodded, her heart pounding with shame and resolve. The stranger's name was Victor, a man known in the underbelly of the town for brokering such deals. That night, Leila stood in a dimly lit room, her dress clinging to her skin, her soul screaming to run. But for her mother, she stayed. The man who paid for her was a faceless figure, his touch mechanical, his words hollow. When it was over, Leila clutched the money, tears burning her eyes, and swore she'd never sink so low again. But the hospital called the next day. Clara's condition had worsened. The $250 was a drop in the bucket, and Leila's heart sank deeper into the abyss. She returned to Victor, begging for more work, but he laughed, saying she'd need to offer more than one night to save her mother. Word of her desperation spread, and soon, whispers reached the mountains beyond the town, where a man lived in solitude, a figure shrouded in mystery. They called him the Mountain Man, a recluse with a past no one dared to speak of. His name was Elias, and he was said to have wealth hidden in the peaks, earned from a life of secrets. When Victor mentioned Leila's plight, Elias's interest stirred, not for her body, but for something deeper, a connection he'd long buried. Leila, unaware of the storm brewing, prepared to sell another night, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. The diner's clock ticked past midnight, and Victor's car waited outside, ready to take her to a new client. But as she stepped into the cold, a shadow loomed, a man with eyes like the forest, deep and untamed. Elias had come for her, not as a buyer, but as something else entirely. He offered her a choice: come with him to the mountains, and he'd pay for Clara's treatment in full. Leila's breath caught: a salvation or a new kind of trap? She had no time to decide as Elias's hand closed around hers, pulling her toward a future unknown. The road to the mountains was a winding scar through the wilderness, the car's headlights slicing through the inky night. Leila sat rigid in the passenger seat, Elias's presence beside her both unsettling and strangely comforting. His hands gripped the wheel, callous and strong, marked by a life of labor and solitude. He barely spoke, his voice a low rumble when he did, telling her only that he'd seen her kind of pain before. Leila's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why did he care? The money he promised at tens of thousands seemed too good to be true, yet the hospital's deadline loomed like a guillotine. The air grew colder as they climbed higher, the town's lights fading into a distant memory. Elias's cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of logs and stone, nestled among towering pines. Inside, it was warm, the scent of cedar and wood smoke wrapping around her like a blanket. Leila's eyes darted to the corners, searching for danger, but found only books, tools, and a life carved from simplicity. Elias set a kettle on the stove, his movements deliberate, and offered her tea. She hesitated, her hands still clutching the diner apron she hadn't thought to remove. He spoke of Clara, how he'd lost someone to illness long ago, his words heavy with a grief that mirrored her own. Leila's guard softened, but suspicion lingered. A man didn't offer such sums without expecting something in return. Elias seemed to sense her doubt, his green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her shiver. He laid out his terms: stay with him for a month, not as a lover, but as a companion to help him rebuild his home, a project he'd abandoned after his loss. In exchange, he'd wire the money to the hospital by morning. Leila's heart wrestled with the hope for freedom for her mother, but at the cost of her own. The cabin felt both safe and suffocating, a paradox she couldn't unravel. She thought of Clara's frail hand in hers, the way her mother's smile had faded with each passing day. Swallowing her fear, Leila agreed, her voice barely a whisper. Elias nodded, his face unreadable, and showed her to a small room with a quilted bed and a window framing the stars. As she lay awake, the mountain's silence pressed against her, broken only by the distant howl of a wolf. She wondered if she'd traded one cage for another, her mind replaying Victor's cruel laughter and the faceless man's touch. But Elias was different. His pain felt real, his offer a lifeline she couldn't refuse. By dawn, the hospital confirmed the payment, and Leila's tears fell, a mix of relief and dread. She was free to save her mother, but bound to a man whose intentions remained a mystery. The mountains loomed outside, vast and unyielding, whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. 3 days in the mountains blurred into a rhythm of labor and quiet moments. Leila woke each morning to the scent of coffee and the clatter of Elias's tools. He taught her to sand wood, to hammer nails, to shape the cabin's new walls with her own hands. Her arms ached, but the work grounded her, pulling her from the spiral of shame that lingered from her nights with Victor's clients. Elias was patient, his instructions clear but never harsh, his presence steady like the pines outside. Yet, he kept his distance, his eyes often lost in a past he wouldn't share. Leila noticed scars on his knuckles, a faded tattoo on his forearm, hints of a life before the mountains. She asked once, but he deflected, saying only that the past was a weight best left behind. The cabin began to transform, its walls stronger, its rooms brighter, much like Leila's own resolve. She called the hospital daily, hearing Clara's voice grow stronger with each treatment, a melody that kept her going. But the mountains were isolating, the nearest town hours away, and Leila felt the weight of her choice. Elias's wealth was relish. She'd seen the bank transfer, but his motives remained opaque. Was he saving her, or claiming her for reasons he wouldn't admit? One evening, as they sat by the fire, Leila pressed him, her voice sharp with frustration. Elias stared into the flames, then spoke of a woman named Anna, his wife, who died when doctors failed her. His guilt was palpable, a shadow that clung to him as tightly as Leila's fear. He admitted he saw Clara in Anna, Leila and himself a chance to right a wrong. The confession disarmed her, but questions lingered. Why her? Why now? The next day, a storm rolled in, trapping them inside. The wind howled, and Leila's unease grew. She found a locked drawer in Elias's desk, its contents rattling when she brushed against it. Curiosity gnawed at her, but fear kept her from prying. Instead, she focused on the work, her hands steadying as she learned to trust the tools and, slowly, Elias. He cooked for her, simple meals of stew and bread, and shared stories of the mountains, their beauty and their dangers. Leila began to see him not as a captor, but as a man haunted by loss, much like herself. Yet, the locked drawer lingered in her mind, a puzzle she couldn't ignore. As the storm raged on, she caught Elias watching her, his gaze softer but no less intense. Her heart stirred, a dangerous mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. The month was half over, and the cabin was nearly complete, but Leila sensed the real work between her and Elias was just beginning. 4. The storm passed, leaving the mountains glittering under a fresh blanket of snow. Leila's days with Elias settled into a fragile trust, her hands now calloused from work, her heart lighter with each call from Clara, whose voice grew stronger daily. The hospital confirmed the treatment was working, a miracle funded by Elias's mysterious wealth. Leila no longer questioned the money's source, but the locked drawer haunted her thoughts. One afternoon, while Elias chopped wood outside, she found herself alone in the cabin. The drawer called to her, its secrets louder than the crack of his axe. Her fingers trembled as she picked the lock with the hairpin, a skill learned from a rebellious youth. Inside, she found letters, yellowed and worn, addressed to Anna. They spoke of love, regret, and a life cut short by illness. There was also a photograph of a younger Elias, smiling beside a woman with kind eyes. Anna, she assumed, but beneath the letters was a newspaper clipping, its headline chilling. Local man suspected in disappearance of business partner. The article hinted at Elias's past, a life of wealth built on questionable deals, a partner who vanished after a dispute. Leela's breath caught, her mind spiraling. Was Elias a savior or danger? She shoved the contents back, her heart racing as Elias's footsteps approached. That night, she couldn't meet his eyes, her questions burning but unspoken. Elias sensed her distance, his brow furrowing, but he said nothing, only stoked the fire and offered her tea. The silence between them grew heavy, a storm of its own. Leela's dreams were restless, filled with images of Clara's frail form and Elias's scarred hands. The next day, she confronted him, her voice shaking as she demanded the truth about the clipping. Elias's face darkened, but he didn't deny it. He spoke of his past, a construction empire built with a partner who betrayed him, a man who disappeared after stealing from their company. Elias swore he hadn't harmed him, but the suspicion had driven him to the mountains, away from a world that judged him guilty. Leela wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered like frost on the windows. Yet, his actions spoke louder. His care for her, his payment for Clara's treatment, the way he taught her to rebuild not just the cabin, but herself. She chose to stay, her heart torn between fear and trust. The cabin neared completion, its walls a testament to their shared labor. Leela began to see Elias not as a mystery, but as a man seeking redemption, much like she sought to save her mother. The mountains, once oppressive, now felt like a sanctuary, their silence a canvas for her healing. But the past wasn't done with them. A letter arrived from Victor, his words dripping with menace, demanding Leela's return to the town. He claimed to know Elias's secrets and threatened to expose them unless she complied. Leela's hands shook as she read, the fragile peace she'd built crumbling under the weight of new fears. The letter from Victor was a blade to Leela's heart, its words twisting her newfound hope into knots. She hid it under her pillow, unwilling to burden Elias, whose own past seemed to haunt him enough. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a fortress under siege. Leela's days were split between finishing the cabin's roof and wrestling with her choices. Elias noticed her unease but attributed it to the mountain's isolation, offering her quiet reassurances that only deepened her guilt for doubting him. She wanted to ask about Victor, about the clipping, but fear of shattering their fragile bond kept her silent. Instead, she threw herself into the work, hammering nails with a ferocity that matched her inner turmoil. The mountains stood sentinel, their peaks indifferent to her struggle. Clara's calls brought joy. Her mother was walking again, her laughter a faint echo of better days. But Victor's threat loomed larger. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Leela found Elias carving a small wooden figure, a bird with delicate wings. He said it was for Anna, a habit he'd kept since her death. The gesture softened Leela's resolve, and she confessed about the letter, her voice breaking as she spoke Victor's name. Elias's face hardened, his eyes flashing with a rage she hadn't seen before. He knew Victor, he admitted, from a life he'd left behind, a man who preyed on desperation, who'd tried to pull Elias back into a world of shadows. Elias vowed to protect her, but his words carried a weight that scared her. The next day, he drove to town, leaving Leela alone with her thoughts and the cabin's creaking walls. She explored the mountains, finding a stream where she could think, its icy water grounding her. Memories of her mother's strength, her own nights of shame, and Elias's quiet kindness swirled in her mind. She realized she was no longer the girl who'd sold herself for $2.50. She was stronger, shaped by the mountains and Elias's belief in her. When Elias returned, his truck carried supplies and a grim expression. He'd confronted Victor, warning him to stay away, but the encounter had left him shaken. Leela saw the toll it took, the way his hands trembled as he unloaded the truck. She reached for him, her touch tentative, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. Their connection deepened, not as lovers, but as two souls bound by survival. The cabin was nearly done, a symbol of their shared redemption, but Victor's shadow lingered. Leela knew she couldn't run forever. Her mother's life was safe, but her own freedom was at stake. The mountains taught her resilience, but the town below held her past, and Victor was its gatekeeper. 6. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains, the air sharp with frost. Leela and Elias worked side by side, their breath visible as they sealed the cabin's final beams. The structure stood proud, a monument to their shared struggle, but the threat of Victor cast a pall over their progress. Leela's nights were restless, her dreams haunted by his leering face and the memory of her desperation. Elias, too, seemed on edge, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. He taught Leela to shoot the rifle, his hands steadying hers as she aimed at a makeshift target. The weight of the weapon felt foreign, but empowering, a reminder she could fight back. Claire's recovery was a beacon, her voice brighter with each call, but Leela knew Victor wouldn't let her go so easily. One morning, a stranger appeared at the cabin's edge, a wiry man with Victor's emblem on his jacket. He delivered a message: Victor wanted Leela back, or he'd expose Elias's past to the authorities. The man's sneer made Leela's skin crawl, but Elias stepped forward, his presence a wall of defiance. The stranger left, but the threat lingered like smoke. Elias confessed more about his past that night, his voice low by the fire. He'd been a man of ambition, building an empire with his partner, only to lose it all when betrayal and suspicion tore them apart. The partner's disappearance wasn't his doing, he swore, but the world hadn't believed him. Leela saw the pain in his eyes, the same pain she carried from her own choices. She shared her story, too, at the diner, the deal with Victor, the shame that clung to her like damp cloth. Elias listened, his silence a balm, and for the first time, Leela felt truly seen. Their bond grew, not romantic but profound, a partnership forged in mutual redemption. But Victor's reach was long, and the next day, a fire broke out near the cabin, its flames licking the pines. Elias and Leela fought it with buckets and blankets, their lungs burning, until the blaze was contained. Suspicion pointed to Victor's men, a warning of his power. Leela's fear turned to resolve as she wouldn't let him win. She and Elias devised a plan: confront Victor in town, expose his dealings, and free themselves from his grip. The risk was high, but so was the cost of doing nothing. As they prepared, Leela found a wooden bird Elias had carved, now finished, its wings poised for flight. It felt like a promise of freedom, of a future beyond the mountains. The night before they left, Leela stood under the stars, the rifle in her hands, ready to face the man who'd tried to break her. 7. The descent into town was a journey into Leela's past, the road unwinding like a thread through her memories. Elias drove in silence, his jaw set, the rifle tucked beneath the seat. Leela's heart pounded, not just with fear of Victor, but with the weight of returning to the place where she'd lost herself. The diner's neon sign flickered as they passed, a cruel reminder of her desperation. Victor's lair was a run-down bar on the town's edge, its windows dark, its air thick with cigarette smoke. Inside, Victor waited, his smile a slash of malice. He mocked Leela, calling her his best investment, and taunted Elias about his past, waving a folder he claimed held proof of Elias's guilt in his partner's disappearance. Leela's blood boiled, but Elias remained calm, his voice steady as he demanded Victor leave them be. The standoff grew tense, Victor's men circling like wolves. Leela's hand brushed the rifle hidden in her coat, her lessons with Elias giving her courage. She spoke, her voice clear, accusing Victor of exploiting women like her, trapping them in desperation. The bar's patrons, some familiar faces from the diner, stirred, their whispers a tide against Victor. He laughed, but unease flickered in his eyes. Elias seized the moment, grabbing the folder and tearing it open. Inside were forged documents, lies meant to frame him. The truth spilled out, and Victor's control slipped. A fight broke out, fists and shouts filling the bar. Leela fired the rifle into the ceiling, the crack silencing the chaos. She stood tall, no longer the girl who'd sold herself for $250, but the woman reclaiming her life. Victor's men backed down, and he fled into the night, his empire crumbling under the weight of exposure. Leela and Elias left the bar, the town buzzing with their victory. They drove back to the mountains, the folder's contents burned in a fire pit, a final release of Elias's past. Claire's recovery was nearly complete, and Leela felt the chains of her own shame fall away. The cabin welcomed them, its walls a testament to their strength. But Leela knew her time with Elias was ending. The month was nearly up, and her mother needed her. The mountains had changed her, given her a strength she hadn't known she had. Elias, too, seemed lighter, his grief for Anna softened by their shared journey. They sat by the fire one last night, the wooden bird between them, a symbol of their freedom. 8. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the cabin in hues of gold. Leela packed her few belongings, her heart heavy with gratitude and a strange sorrow. Elias stood by the door, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. He handed her the wooden bird, its wings catching the light, and told her it was hers now, a reminder of her strength. Leela's fingers traced its edges, tears welling as she thought of Clara, now strong enough to leave the hospital. The money Elias had paid had saved her mother, but his presence had saved Leela, too, in ways she couldn't fully articulate. They drove to town in silence, the rifle left behind, its purpose served. At the hospital, Clara embraced Leela, her arms strong, her smile radiant. Elias watched from a distance, his role in their reunion unspoken but profound. Leela introduced him, and Clara's gratitude spilled over, her words weaving a bond between them all. But Leela knew she couldn't stay in the mountains forever. Her life was with her mother, rebuilding the future they'd nearly lost. Elias understood, his nod a quiet farewell. He gave her a letter, to be opened later, and drove back to his solitude. Leela and Clara returned to their small apartment, the town no longer a place of shame but a canvas for new beginnings. Leela found work at a bookstore, her hands no longer trembling as she turned pages instead of serving plates. The letter from Elias waited in her pocket, its weight a comfort. When she finally opened it, his words were simple: "You saved me as much as I saved you. Live free." Enclosed was a deed to a small plot of land near the mountains, a gift for her future. Leela's heart swelled, not with obligation, but with possibility. She visited the mountains one last time, standing by the stream where she'd found clarity. The wooden bird sat in her palm, its wings a promise of flight. Victor was gone, his bar shuttered, his threats silenced by the town's newfound courage. Leela's past no longer defined her. She was a daughter, a survivor, a woman shaped by the mountains and a man who'd seen her worth. As she walked away, the peaks stood tall, whispering of resilience, redemption, and a life reclaimed.